Very good morning, dear students. The topic that I have selected today for today's lecture is a novel by George Eliot. George Eliot is, of course, a pen name, as you all might know. Her actual name was Mary Ann Evans, and the novel under discussion will be Silas Marner. I just have this book with me, and it's also available online. So if you just search, you may find the book. But what actually brings me to this book today is the various metatextual elements that are present in the book and which enrich the book and take it to a different level altogether. Now, we all know that George Eliot, those of you who have studied history of English literature, know that she is a Victorian writer, a writer who was one of the most erudite, learned, writers of the Victorian age. She was at the same time a translator, linguist. She knew Latin, German, and of course her own English language. She was fluent in many languages. And I will not go into her biographical or historical details as such, because today we are concentrating on one of her greatest works, which is Silas Marner, the novel Silas Marner. So, this is her fourth work, and one must note the date of publication whenever we start reading a novel, whether it is for our course or for our personal interest. So, the date of publication of this novel is 1861. Now, when we talk of a period, the mid 19th century, and we normally think of social movements like the Industrial Revolution and the religious conflicts that came in the post-Darwin era. So we're going to talk about, touch upon these aspects briefly. But when we touch upon the major thematic concerns of the novel. So this is her fourth novel. It was published in 1861, as I have mentioned, but the writer mentions that the actions of the novel go back to the early 1800s. And so it is, a novel that straddles both the Romantic and the Victorian era. Now, if we look at the narration, the narrative pattern, and if we look at the themes, then we will see that there is a kind of turning away from the era of Industrial Revolution, from the Victorian period, and a kind of return to nature, which is so characteristic of the Romantic period, which we find in this novel. The novel revolves around the story, the character of Silas Marner and his life story. Silas Marner, belongs to the early, 1800s. He lives in a place called Lantern Yard, where he is a very active member of the Calvinist Calvinist and Methodist Church. And as a active member, he's a frequenter to the church. So we see him in the small township. In the very beginning of the novel, we see him in the small township of Lantern Yard. But a event changes the course of his life when he is accused of theft, of stealing money belonging to the church of which he is a staunch believer. He's a believer of the church, as I said, an active member of the church. But due to a turn of events, he is, accused of theft. And not only is he accused, he is actually framed by his best friend, William Dane, who accuses him, along with the other members of the community, who accuses him primarily of the theft. And as such, Silas finds himself defenseless. And, in this, very low and condition of his life, he finds that his betrothed, the girl who was supposed to be married to him, they were engaged, Silas and Sarah. She also breaks off the betrothal and gets married to William Dane. This leaves our hero totally alone and alienated from the Lantern Yard Society, which is a society slowly moving towards industrialization. So, what happens to Silas after that is a total turning away from society, from humanity, a complete sense of betrayal and loss of faith, both in institutionalized religion as well as in humanity. So it is at this point of life that Silas makes a major decision to go away, to leave Lantern Yard, this small township of Lantern Yard, and he makes his way to the from the northern part of England to the Midlands, where he decides to settle down in a small village called Ravello, and he continues in his alienated life. So the novel also brings into focus, very importantly, the idea of alienation or marginalization, othering. These concepts, which we today in the post-colonial, set of thought, these are concepts which have gained prominence and which are oft studied and analyzed. But way back in 1861, we find that the germ or the embryo of these ideas were already existing in works like Silas Marner and various other such Victorian novels. So this novel begins as a study of man's alienation from society, man's solitariness, and his turning away from established and institutionalized society and religion, and turning back towards a more primitive way of life. So, in the following chapters of the novel, we follow Silas Marner's life as he begins a new life in Ravello, away from the familiar circumstance of his life before he was accused of the theft. So there he begins his life and continues his profession of a weaver. So Silas Marner is a weaver by profession, and he provides cotton and linen, cloth and laces to households, which he weaves on his loom. So once he arrives in Ravello, he settles down in a corner of the village near a stone quarry, builds himself a house and settles down, starts to live there, continuing his profession of weaving. But the Silas that we meet in Ravello is vastly different from the Silas who used to be, you know, active in society and in church during his time at Lantern Yard, his previous place of stay. Anyway, here we find a man who is totally lonely, totally solitary, and living a life alienated from the rest of society. Someone who has totally lost faith in human bondage, in humanity. So now, this new Silas is a man who lives his life mechanically, who spends the greater part of his time, of his waking hours, weaving constantly on his loom, and the only times that he is out of the house is when he goes to sell his wares at the village houses, at the homes of the aristocratic people who reside in that village, and when he comes back with his sack full of thread for further weaving. So we see that his entire life becomes a kind of mechanical existence without any human touch. Now here I would like to introduce an important idea which the writer had mentioned before going on to the latter part of the novel, and before seeing how Silas is transformed from this alienated mechanical existence to a life where he becomes a part of society. But before that, today what I want to concentrate on is a line of thought which runs in the novel and which has been mentioned in George Eliot's letters to her publisher. And that is the element of the fable, the fairy tale in the narration in the novel. Now, if we look at the figure of Silas, then we see a, a completely othered or marginalized man who stays away from society and from human touch, from human connection, who chooses to stay like that because he has been betrayed, his faith is lost in humanity, and because of his profession, he is a man who is physically also a little, his stature goes through certain distortions because of his constant weaving. He is short-sighted. He has to look closely at things because of his selling of wares or his linen from house to house. It is seen that he is a little stooped and a little hunched because he carries his satchel, heavy satchel, from place to place. He is not very tall, um, almost short by English standards. He is old. He is, someone who um, brings out inquisitiveness, curiosity, and even a sense of fear in the people who see him from afar, because his figure, stooped figure, walking alone with a satchel on his back, brings to mind the the figure of a child kidnapper or someone who goes from house to house kidnapping little children, which is popular in collective thought, where children are often afraid of such alienated figures. Anyway, so George Eliot, in one of her letters to her publisher, when she spoke about writing this novel, she mentioned that of a childhood memory that she had of seeing such a figure, a man, a stooped, hunched man, walking alone on the road in front of her house. And it's a memory that remained with her. And later on, when she thought about writing this novel, or forming this novel, the idea or the figure of the man, you know came into her recollections, and it is based on that figure that she creates the character of Silas Marden. Critics have also talked about the fable like quality of the novel in terms of the relationship that Silas later develops with an orphaned child named Epi. Now, I have already mentioned that Silas lives an alienated life alone in the village of Ravello. So, in this way, he spends about 15 years friendless, alone, and one fine evening, it's on the day of the eve of New Year's. It's London, England winter, pretty cold. So on one such day, he discovers, to his great surprise, that a 2-year-old girl child, has crept into his house and is sleeping near his warm fireplace. So he is, first of all, his attention is caught by the gold colored hair of this child. And when he looks closer, he finds the child, to his utter surprise. So he carries the child and tries to trace the footsteps of the child in the snow, and in this way he discovers the body of a woman lying in the snow, obviously the child's mother. The woman, in the meantime, has collapsed and died. She had come to the village, to the house of the Squire Cass, whose eldest son, Godfrey Cass, is the father of this child. So there is another story there regarding Molly and Godfrey, who had married in secret. But Molly, belonging to the lower classes, is unacceptable to the family of the squire, so this marriage is kept a secret. And she stays in the neighboring town, and slowly, as this relationship disintegrates, she turns into an opium addict. And on that particular night, she had carried the child to claim fatherhood for this child, to expose this child to the world. But on her way, when she crosses Silas's house, because of the cold, because of her illness, whatever the reason, she takes a dope of opium and collapses there and loses her life, leaving the motherless child in the care of, not consciously living, but the child crawls into Silas's home, attracted by the light and the heat of the fire. So in this way, due to these circumstances, the child is left in Silas's care, and Silas then adopts this child because no one in the village is ready to do so. So this is how Epi, little Epi, 2-year-old Epi, comes into Silas's life. So here we have an old man, a weaver, who evokes the idea of a child kidnapper who is left, alone with a 2-year-old child. Now, coincidentally, when Silas discovers the body of this woman, he runs to the house of the squire and to alert the people that there is a woman lying in the snow. And Godfrey, who is actually the father of the child, comes and sees the dead body of Molly, his secret wife, and chooses to remain quiet so that he can go ahead in his plans to live a legitimate life and get legitimately married to the girl of his choice. So, in this way, we see that Silas is the one who offers care, compassion, and love to this orphaned or this motherless child. So, here in this connection between a helpless child and this alienated man, we see a rejuvenation happening in the life of both the individuals who are brought together by circumstances. We see Epi blooming, blossoming into a beautiful young girl in course of time, and we also see um, our hero Silas Marner emerging from his solitude and becoming a part of the society of Ravello. But more of that later in our next installment. What today I wanted to talk about is the fable like quality of this novel, which the writer has mentioned and which many critics have also pointed out. So, when we look at this father child relationship, then we are reminded of, or critics have looked at, two iconic fairy tales where such a relationship, father and child relationship, is uh, focused on. One is the story of Midas, who touches his daughter and she is turned into a statue, a lifeless statue of gold. So we have the story of Midas on the one hand, and we have on the other hand the story of the German folk tale from the German Grimm's fairy tales, the story of Rumpelstiltskin, who is a child kidnapper and who has the ability to turn straw into gold. So, in both these stories, a symbolic element is seen in the use of the precious metal gold, and a connect can be found in the story of Silas Marner to these two stories, which is can be said to be studies of fatherhood and the rejuvenation, the regaining of faith, the regaining of something precious, something which is as precious or more precious than gold, through the figure of the daughter. So it is possible to read, both elements of both these stories in the figure. The physical appearance of Silas Marner is particularly close to the figure of Rumpelstiltskin, and the gold hair of the little girl and how Silas comes upon her, together with his own preoccupation with money. Once he becomes alienated from society, once he starts becoming alone, the only succor of his life, the only joy of his life remains the money, the gold coins that he earns through his weaving and which he keeps in a hidden place in his house and which he takes out every night before dinner to count and draw pleasure from. So, this idea of gold, this idea of um, the father-daughter relationship, the possibilities of rejuvenation that is opened up by such a relationship, and the connect that one can draw between fables, fairy tales, which are part of the collective unconscious, as Carl Jung has pointed out. These are elements which enrich the novel, which makes the novel extremely interesting to read and gives a profound depth to the novel. In my next upload, I shall be talking further about this novel, and I will then talk about the major themes while progressing with the story. Hope this will be helpful for you. Thank you.